Sir Leo, for that introduction. So let me share my screen. Thank you, Sir Leo, for that introduction. So let me share my screen. Okay, so I hope you can see my screen now. All right, so hello everyone. Again, I'm EJ from the Fortinet Security Philippines, Systems Engineer for Enterprise and Public Sector. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to discuss with you the value of threat intelligence platform and how it addresses the ever-evolving cyber threats. Okay. So for today's session, this is our agenda. Since our theme for today is cybersecurity and threat intelligence, for this session, we're going to discuss the threat landscape reports generated by the threat intelligence of Fortinet, which is the FortiGuard, for the first half of the year. Its prediction on what are the cyber threats that we will likely be facing next year. And lastly, the FortiGuard Labs, which is the threat intelligence platform behind these reports, and how it works continuously to protect customers, our partner vendors, and alliances in the market. Okay, so moving on to the threat landscape report. In the cybersecurity world, every year gets a year of designation based on the industry consensus. So we are almost done at this point, but it seems to us that 2021 is building a good case to become known as the year of the outbreak. We have seen a wide scale of attacks to spread to envelope numerous organizations, and countless individuals become regular occurrence. Different attacks on the OT and IT segments. We have studied the aftermath and summarized developments that we hope keep you one step ahead of whatever breaks out next. So in this particular figure, it presents the top technologies targeted by exploit attempts during the first half of 2021. Overall, the IPS detections reflect several general trends we've seen for some time now. There you can see the web servers, the content management systems, the IoT devices, of course, and many, many more. So the HTTP signature here, which is ranking first for the first 2 months of the year, claiming the top spot, is admittedly vague, but it encompasses a long list of exploits targeting web servers. So we have different exploits related to HTTP for these web servers. To give a few concrete examples, the IPS triggers racking up the highest volume were the HTTP server attacks related to buffer overflow, Java code injection, SQL injection, and so forth. Sticking with the theme of exploits targeting web and other enterprise servers, Microsoft and Linux make regular appearances as well. Okay, that's not a huge surprise given the wide usage of these platforms. The primary signature behind the rise of Linux-based detection started in March. Relates to a vulnerability, allowing a remote attacker to trigger a kernel panic in systems, thereby impacting availability. So it's not just the Microsoft vulnerabilities anymore. So currently we are also seeing Linux-based attacks. So top IPS detections reveal several examples also of high related network and IoT devices, including those from Netgear, D-Link, DASAN, and JAWS. So these are quite related or quite familiar for most of you. So these are devices commonly used by your end remote users. So with the advent of the remote working setup, we usually found these devices at the comfort of your home. Okay. The shift to remote and home-based network has brought devices populating those environments. So they are being targeted by cyber threat attackers, especially because they always access critical application or data within your network. So imagine how many devices lies between this remote workforce going to your primary data center. And all these devices that lies in between are all entry point of these attackers. even more worrisome to corporate security programs, however, is the potential attack launched from a remote worker's home. No? So these are the personal data that they are trying to get, not just personal data, but company's critical asset as well. Now you think this is the season wherein there's no IT staff that will regularly inform these users not to do this. You only have to do this. No. So the users are more of on their own than ever before. Okay. So in this particular graph, you'll see the climb to the top in the May and June of Microsoft-related exploits. So we are very familiar with the proxy logon vulnerability that has exploded in March. So Microsoft released the vulnerability patch in March, but actually the vulnerability was started being exploited early in January. So the funny thing here is upon the release of the advisory in March, so why suddenly it rising up to May and June? So it only shows that some of the attackers or leverage the information they got from this advisory in order for them to look or scan some other organizations that might be victimized by them. So later on, we will discuss this as the highlighted stories of 2021. Okay. So this chart is tailor-made to answer the very important questions. So what are the new exploits of the organizations like mine detecting? So please take time to look at this chart, no? So you can familiarize yourselves whether which new exploits are targeting your organization or your verticals. Okay. So to summarize this, that chart makes it very clear that certain sectors see higher levels of activity regardless of the specific exploit in question. So we can see that education, government, managed security service providers, and telecommunications are visibly hotter across the board, often twice or even 3 times the prevalence exhibited in other sectors. So the basic question is why? Simply because organizations in these sectors tend to have high number of devices and represent numerous subsidiaries. So imagine a single device. Of course, there are lots of vulnerabilities that can be exploited by attackers and so forth. So government have their own sub-agencies, telcos and the service, the MSSP and the telcos have very large installed base of their customers. And some of them, most notably, the educational institution traditionally have looser control over the security and the usage of those devices. Now we are looking at the samples detected by our various anti-malware solutions, offer insight into popular techniques for establishing a foothold within corporate environments. So this is the malware detected in the first half of 2021. So within the context of the attack framework, this activity correlates with the execution phase, in which attackers attempt to deploy and run malicious code on a target system. So we've chosen to group malware into families rather than specific variants in this graph. Our purpose is to group the numerous, often short-lived variants by their similarity, so we don't lose the big picture among the details. Okay. So looking closer to the graph, we can rank the prevalence of top malware detection by malware families show a rise in deceptive social engineering or the JavaScript-based malvertising and scareware. Example is the Cryptos. So it's a JavaScript malvertising malware. Such schemes are commonly associated with fake notifications purporting to be the Microsoft tech support team. In a typical scenario, users receive some types of messages. Example, a browser pop-up or a random email stating that their devices has been infected or hacked. The user is then urged to contact or sometimes even pay the support staff to grant remote access to help fixing the issue. Overall, there's a statistic showing that more than 1 in 4 organizations detected malvertising or scareware attempts during the first half of 2021. Malvertising is not a new tactic, nor is the most dangerous form or function of the malware. The remote work end has undoubtedly contributed to malvertising's rise up the charts, of course, because sometimes organizations get a little bit of relaxing on the edge side or the user edge part of their network. Okay, so many working outside the traditionally more secure confines of the corporate perimeter and also deprived of the convenience of being with the IT staffs. You can see in this paragraph the last 12 months that the same malware is the top threat within Asia Pacific and even in Europe. Okay. In addition to listing the malware samples detected over the last 6 months, we wanted to go one step further to study the specific functionality inherent to those samples. So the best way to do it is, of course, detonate this malware and observe what it's actually attempting to do. Okay, and that's exactly what we did to create this illustration. This depicts several attack framework tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTP, associated with the malware analyzed by our sandboxing technology or the cloud service FortiSandbox. Think of it as the laundry list of all the nasty things these malware samples might do when they landed on your network. Okay? So most of them seek to escalate privileges, evade defenses, or begin moving laterally across internal systems. They can also establish command and control, exfiltrate compromised data, and accomplish whatever impact they're trying to do with someone's organization. Okay, so this shows a relative frequency of malware TTPs observed in the first half of 2021. So percentage shown that in this chart, the frequency of the top level tactic, 55% of the privilege escalation technique is leveraged by the use of hooking. So code hooking is a very intrusive coding operation where mainly OS functions calls are intercepted by a program to alter or augment their behavior. So it aims to change the behavior of a certain program to be able for them to do what's on their objective. Then next one, 40% is utilize the process injection and so forth. So though none of these are novel, but some require deep instrumentation at the kernel level. So these malwares are not easily can be detected actually. So some of them are hiding or using different techniques to be as evasive as they can, so as to bypass your defenses. So this is what happened actually in the proxy logon vulnerability or the Microsoft Exchange Server 0-day vulnerability. So, as I mentioned, we're gonna talk about it later. Okay. So while IPS and malware trends reveal what's happening on the pre-compromise of the attack framework, meaning the pre-attack stage. So botnet grants insight to malicious activities that occur during the right of the bottom or the post-compromise phase in terms of the attack framework. So this is most closely associated with techniques falling under the command and control, whereby infected systems communicate with the external ones, or external malicious hosts or servers. Okay. So before we discuss which botnets top these charts, so let's cover first how it is interpreted. So the height of the color streams right here correlates with the number of organizations detecting activity associated with each botnet. So the higher the color is, or the thicker the color is, meaning the more organizations have been affected or tried to be penetrated by these botnet attacks. Okay, and the ones in the bottom are for everything else. So that's very small portion of the botnet families in terms of numbers. So you probably notice something else about this chart, a big jump in activity toward the end of the half. So from January, it's from 35%, but then later in May and June, it jumped to 51%. So let's take a look what's behind the surge. Okay, so as we know, many of you are familiar with the Mirai botnet. So it is the thickest band and is therefore the most prevalent. It overtook Ghost botnet in early 2020 and has reigned supreme ever since. So Mirai, if some of you can remember, became infamous for their massive IoT-based DDoS attack back in 2016, I think. So since that time, Mirai has continued adding new cyber weapons to its arsenal to retain its dominance. So we hate to sound it, but it's like they're keeping to break some records in terms of cybersecurity botnets. So Ghost is noticeably here as well across the period. It's a remote access botnet that allows attacker to full control of the infected system. They can actually log keystrokes, access live webcams, and microphone feeds. And it can even download or upload files and other malicious activities. So in a very unusual twist, we can see that in the early part of the year, we can depict some of the most common botnets that we've known from the past. But at the end of the duration or the May and June month, so we are basically looking at new players in the market. So the large bump in trick bot activity toward the end of the half is largely responsible for the overall spike in the botnet data or activity during June. So TrickBot emerged on the cybercrime scene as a banking Trojan at first, but has since been developed into a sophisticated, modular, and multi-stage toolkit, even used by ransomware activities as well. So this chart shows the prime target for TrickBot globally. So it is mainly detected in North America, Oceania, and Europe. Okay, so going on, I want to share some of the highlights in terms of cybersecurity on the first half of 2021. Okay. First, as we discussed earlier, the proxy logon feeding frenzy. So it's basically a set of 4 vulnerabilities in the Microsoft Exchange server, which cause widespread concern the first half of the 2021, as you can see the graph. Okay, so it's the Microsoft actually issued the patch for this on March 2. So they refer to it as a proxy logon, pose a threat to organization with internet-facing Exchange servers that accepted untrusted connections from an external source. Some vendors reported more than 30% of incidents detected in May and June of 2021 are tied to Exchange flows or Exchange server flows. So this actually a step-by-step vulnerability exploiting process for the attackers that when these 4 vulnerabilities are chained together, it gives the attackers way to remotely execute malicious code on the Exchange servers and install backdoors. So a China-based APT group or Advanced Persistent Threat Group called the HAFNUM is believed to have attacked at least 30,000 US-based organizations. So imagine that. No? Before the Microsoft even released the fix for it. So as you can see, after the Microsoft disclosed the flaws, numerous other criminal groups, state-backed operators, and even small opportunistic hackers began targeting them in a virtual feeding frenzy. So of course, not as reactive as some of the organizations are. Some of these opportunistic hackers or attackers still found their way to exploit this vulnerability even after the Microsoft already released the first. So the next highlighted story, of course, the very common or the very dangerous ransomware right now. So ransomware remained as ominous a threat for organizations worldwide during the first 2 quarters of this year, no? And as well as for the several quarters. Though we did not observe dramatic surge for the second half of 2020 last year, ransomware levels remained high and increased steadily over the course of the year. In fact, during these statistics of a 12-month period, 10.7 times higher counts of ransomware are reported and detected from the past year. Furthermore, ransomware presents a threat to a much broader range of industries rather than just the healthcare, government, and education sector. Of note and concern, this year there were some attacks in OT or operational technology networks and organizations in sectors of critical importance. One example is an attack in May. We are very familiar with the Colonial Pipeline that resulted in a temporary but severe disruption of the fuel supply across large section of the U.S. East Coast. So as reported, Colonial Pipeline paid approximately $4.4 million to DarkSide. So DarkSide is the Russian threat actor behind the attack. So it just to regain control of their pipeline. So another attack in May, very large meat company, JBS, one of the world's largest meat processor, faced a similar disruption or reported similar disruption. So JBS paid reportedly $11 million to attackers to resolve this issue. So imagine the massive amount of money being paid to these attackers. So the two incidents elevated ransomware to the level of national security concern, of course. It actually prompted the U.S. Department of Justice to consider treating such attack as they call terrorist attacks too. So the level of attention that attacks garnered even pushed some of the cyber threat actors to cease their operations. So samples are DarkSide, Abaddon, and Ziggy. So they ceased their operations after this turn of events. So actually, in fact, in Fortinet, we have discovered in January one variant of ransomware. So it's called the Dark World. It's written in .NET and was observed spawning 10 encryption threats using the AES algorithm to lock victims' files. So, but it's not as present here in the Philippines. So most of the variants were detected from India, Colombia, and France, and US as well. Okay. So the next featured story is the prevalence and volume of exploits in the OT and IT. So before, operational technology may not get the same attention as IT, right? But its connection to our physical world means it can impact lives long after we close laptop at the end of the day. Until recently, OT networks were treated or were placed in an air-gapped environment, isolated, right? But we know OT nowadays, it's becoming fully automated or semi-automated. The monitoring lets this OT infrastructure connect to the IT segment as well. There's OT devices sensors, conveyors, and so forth are now sending data as well to the central office for monitoring and automation, right? So the likes of OT are disrupted nowadays. Exploit against the supervisory control and data acquisition, or SCADA, or industrial control systems, the ICS, were viewed by many as rare subset of highly targeted attacks that most organizations are really not putting their attention, right? But is that perception accurate in light of modern threats? So let's see on this graph. This chart plots the IPS detections according to their prevalence and volume. So if you can see, gray dots represent the spectrum of prevalence for IT, and the red dots represent that of OT systems. So while IT-related exploits are clearly more numerous and exhibit greater prevalence and volume, the relative high volume of the OT incidents may surprise many of you, right? So at the very least, we see in this chart shatters the perception that ICS exploits are an obscure niche of cyber threat intelligence. So OT really is being targeted nowadays. The fact is, when you target OT, it's not just the personal data that you can get out of it. So you can also affect lives of the people working on that specific area, right? So we can see the next one is the emotet takedown. Of course, after some of the bad news of the highlighted stories, we have some positive ones. No? So law enforcement authorities from multiple countries, including US, Netherlands, UK, and Germany, took down the emotet botnet infrastructure. So the ones they're using for their command and control servers were taken down. So as you can see, in this graph, the operations or the detection drastically lowered down from March to June. But still, there are some incidents as well that these are visible. The emotet are still out there, being used by attackers. So we cannot lower down our defense for this botnet. So we have to make sure that our security are always updated and always up to defend our organization and our users as well. So okay, so according to FortiGuard Labs, 2022 is shaping up to be a banner of year for the criminals. With ransomware on the rise, unprecedented number of attacks to find victims' personal data or your organization's critical assets. So we can also see that organizations are transitioning to a more hybrid environments. You adopt the remote working setup. You use to leverage the AI and machine learning based technologies, and to use the new technologies in terms of connectivity. For example, the 5G now. So the future may hold in relation to cyber threat as well. So we give ourselves the possible chance of defeating them. If we want to know them, we need to understand what the future might bring to us in terms of the cybersecurity. Okay. So one of the prediction from FortiGuard Labs is the fresh blood. So while most attacks continue to exploit known vulnerabilities, cyber criminals have also redoubled efforts to target new ones or mga zero-day vulnerabilities that we have. As part of our featured stories, one of the example is the proxy log-on of the MS Exchange server vulnerability. So it was some type of a zero-day vulnerability wherein the vendor was only able to release the patch 2 months after the patient zero. So Half-Numes, the attacker responsible for it, performed a largely automated attacks, targeted unpatched Exchange servers, and then use a device web shell to control the malware remotely. So they were able to steal data, gain unauthorized access, and install backdoors on critical systems. And it was reported that tens of thousands of organizations were affected worldwide. So in 2022, we can expect the same feeding frenzy for fresh vulnerabilities to continue beyond half noon. Okay. So in response to high-profile attacks of the past year, many organizations are finally dedicating time to basic cyber hygiene. So most of the organizations now are doing the must-have patch installations, right? So they're catching up on the 1 to 3-year-old CVE, or the common vulnerability and exposure. And most cyber criminals seeks to exploit. Okay. 2022 will most likely be a banner year for the CVEs reported, and attackers will begin to leverage those fresh or zero-day vulnerabilities to target unprepared organizations. So as we give some solutions and countermeasures, so when zero-day attacks are executed locally, they can be detected using security systems such as advanced extended detection response, or the XDR for networks, and some endpoint detection response, or EDR for endpoints. So these technologies block critical malware functions such as contacting C2 server or downloading a malicious payload. Some as well, like sandboxing technology, is another essential tool. So it can be integrated within your network devices, such as next-gen firewall, secure email gateways, and other cloud-based security solutions. So it can be also part of your next-gen firewall currently installed in your premise, right? So it aims to detonate malicious software, or those that are not categorized as bad or as good. So as long as it doesn't have any signature or acting as malicious, sandboxing can actually detonate it and understand the behavior when executed. Okay. So another effective strategy is implementing automation and analytic tools designed to recognize attack patterns and techniques such as behavioral analytics and deceptive network strategies, which combined with honeypots, or right now deception technology as well is emerging in the market, whereas they are installing honeypots for attackers so they can understand what are the attackers' motive, or how these attackers perform their attacks, what are they trying to get from your organization. Okay. So having also an AI-based monitoring will help you to train or spot anomalous behavior. And it can actually analyze logs in order for you to get some indicators of compromised information or detect complex and multi-front attacks. Next one is next prediction are the new areas of exploitation. So traditional targets will still be high on the menu. So Windows 11 is already out, and of course there will be new vulnerabilities associated with this new OS. And these attackers will expectedly try to exploit. But that's just the start. In the upcoming year, we'll also see some new areas of exploitation being explored. So you can see in the diagram some of the examples. So first is the Linux. So as we know, Linux are less targeted systems, right? But it is being used by many backend systems. And for the hackers community, it's being ignored until recently. Vermilion Strike, for example, is a malicious implementation of the critical feature called the beacon within the infamous Cobalt Strike tool. Okay, so we know that Vermilion Strikes targeted Linux system with remote access capabilities because it runs entirely undetected in the Linux system. So right now, It's not just the Windows, but as well as Linux systems are being opened or being developed with advanced attacks. Actually, Linux botnets are now present in the market. So new botnet malware is being written for Linux platforms that can both weaponize devices as well as slow down performance of Linux systems. So this further expands the threat surface to the edge of the network and increases the threats that need to be defended there by our cybersecurity team, right? So we expect to see even more of this activity in the Linux system, targeting edge devices that cyber criminals have traditionally overlooked, no? Or we are actually sometimes in the organization we are ignoring to install antivirus or endpoint protection for these Linux systems, right? Because we are always thinking that it is more secure than the Windows. So right now it's not the case anymore. Okay, so the next example is the OT or operational technology. And other non-traditional targets. We will see an increase in attacks on the non-traditional targets such as OT systems, according to the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency or the CISA report. So ransomware attacks are increasingly targeting critical infrastructure and have demonstrated the rising threat of ransomware to operational technology. In a similar report conducted or shared by the National Security Agency, they said that as OT components continue being connected to the IT segment, so IT exploitation increasingly can serve as a pivot to OT destructive effects. So sometimes attackers can enter from OT going to IT, but some which has existing foothold in the IT segment, they can actually penetrate the OT network, which is more destructive and can affect lives of people, right? And the last thing is the machine learning. It is predicted that will be targeted in the next year. So we are also likely to see the first attempt. Actually, the criminals will be targeting the internet-facing ML systems or machine learning nodes located at the edge of your networks. No? So the Attack MITRE framework has actually announced the new threat matrix called the Atlas or the Adversarial Threat Landscape for Artificial Intelligence Systems. So it's designed to help organizations to identify, categorize attacks that is targeting the AI and machine learning based systems as well. So in order for us to not totally solve but minimize and provide countermeasures, we need to address the expanding attack surface that requires developing and deploying a complete security mesh. So it's not only a single isolated solution that we can use, but rather a cybersecurity mesh which actually interrelated or integrate with multiple solutions, right? So we have EDR that can help us, network-based IPS that are continuously updated in terms of signatures. We can also use honeypots or sandbox, implement zero trust network access or the zero trust access for IoT and OT system as well, so as to limit the spread of the exploit or the vulnerability in case that there is a foothold already in your organization. So with zero trust, you can limit the surface of attack or privilege or the access of the attacker from moving laterally in your network. Okay. Next one is the bounty hunters or the cyber wars. So one interesting outcome of the rapid growth of cybercrime is that criminal organizations are now finding themselves stepping on each other. So it's like a turf wars. It has started already wherein this disgruntled pen tester shared the playbook of its company, how they do the attack, how they are able to gain access, which are the organizations that are likely targeting, right? So, as you can see, these cyber criminals attack each other as well. So they do some hijacking of the servers of their competitors, no? So their end goal is probably they want their competitors to end their operations so as to get a large part of the pie in terms of the cybersecurity, right? So these attackers as well are already cautious of this events happening. So they're also implementing cybersecurity in their infrastructure, the command and control server. So they are using digitally signed certificates. They are implementing actually MFA as well, or the multi-factor authentication, to avoid their competition, no, to entering their network as well. So while the increase in conflicts between cyber crimes may not directly impact business and governmental organizations, so the leaked threat playbooks can be used or can be integrated with your existing security solution. Like, for example, the SOAR, or the Security Orchestration and Automation Response System. As we know, it runs several playbooks. So as these cyber criminals leak these threat playbooks, so we can actually integrate it to our system in order for it to aid probably our NOC or SOC to have a more automated response for these types of attacks or playbooks. Okay. So the next one is the localized wallet heists. So in the last few years, we can see a decline in the Trojans targeting bank transactions and wire transfers. Probably because banks are now elevating their security. We know that banks are better in detecting and preventing malware and fraud right now, right? So the attackers, they think that instead of focusing on this high-profile target, for example, a bank, why we don't just target digital wallets, no? Right now? So it's becoming a normal mode of payment or transaction these days, right now, during the COVID era, right? So FortiGuard Labs recently documented a new phishing threat that uses a fake Amazon gift card generator to steal cryptocurrency. So this malware monitors the victim's clipboard for wallet addresses and replaces them with the attacker's wallet. So this is precisely a hijack and digital robbery, as we say, right? So it also uses fake document to lure victims into potentially giving out confidential information, such as credentials for online shopping sites, credit card numbers, and home addresses. Okay. So we expect to see more malware designed to target the stored crypto credentials and drain digital wallets in the upcoming year. So the best strategy for securing digital wallet is the distribution of the EDR technology, as endpoint continue to be the primary point of vulnerability for most organizations. Okay, we can also leverage the AI-based antivirus that we currently have to disrupt the attack before it can complete its objective. So next prediction, ransomware wipers. So not the typical ransomware that encrypt or steal data, but ransomware wipers include actually deleting data and cripple critical systems, such as OT or manufacturing equipment and servers, unless a ransom demand is met. So ironically, wiper malware is nearly a decade old. No? We have known some, like the Dark Soul or Shamoon, for example, were a notorious wiper back in 2012, right? So Criminals also added some extortion to their activities. There's still critical data of the customers. Then sometimes the threat actors actually communicate with the victim's customers in order to put more pressure to the victim to pay, right? And Wiper malware has already made a visible comeback this summer. Actually, in the Olympic Games in Tokyo, it disrupted the train services in Iran as well. Okay, so given the level of convergence we have seen between attack methods and APTs, we believe that it's just a matter of time before this Wiper ransomware will go again live in the market. So organizations have not just installed a single solution in order for these to resolve, but rather deploy tools designed to block and interrupt today's increasingly effective and disruptive ransomware attack. So many of these predictions starts with robust endpoint security strategy that includes AI-based antivirus, EDR, zero trust controls can also be implemented as well to limit the attack or the effect of the attack, no? To prevent lateral movement of the infected network. And we can also, of course, train our employees, make them aware of their activities. We can also do some tabletop activities or ransomware plans to plan ahead in case ransomware affected your organization. Okay, next one is the cybercrime gains. So nowadays, we know that esports have their revenue rise massively, right? So in 2022, we expect that attackers will likely target esports as well. So most of the online casino right now have their own dedicated esport floor, right? So service providers and esport providers need to provide secure gaming environment as well to prevent different attacks such as DDoS, web application-based attacks. So they should also include AI-based hunting tools to detect threats. No? So having your, for example, web application firewall doing some machine learning AI based capabilities will help you protect against these advanced threats. Okay. Then last.
Hi, EJ. Hi, sorry to interject. Your 45 minutes is almost up. We might need to ask you to wrap up your presentation.
Yes, yes, sir. So this will be the last slide actually. Okay, so for this final slide, since many of tomorrow threats are simply extension of that we experience today, so they tend to be faster. So what we actually need right now is for our security technologies to work hand in hand with each other. So in Fortinet, we develop a cybersecurity platform. We call it a security fabric, which aims to protect the entire digital attack surface. No? So it's broad because it can provide visibility to the entire attack surface. It's integrated because it actually uses common threat intelligence and as well as the common operating system, which is the FortiOS. And with our high-speed AI machine learning-based FortiGuard threat intelligence, we are able to get lots of data globally from our customers' installed base and push the actionable threat intelligence back to the environment or to the installed bases of our customers. So with that, I'd like to end my presentation.